Thanks, Larry, Tom, Wes, if he's here, Andy, Art, a bunch of other people that have been involved in my life for a long time, like Leroy and Mark McFerrin and other people that have known me. I appreciate y'all having me here. I've been here a number of times. I work at Brentwood Academy, so I don't get to come every week because sometimes I've got Hal Haddon, people that are just had huge impacts. It's good to see many familiar faces. I'm Ray Mullican. I'm a 62-year-old local Franklin boy. Most of this story takes place within 5 miles of where we're standing. So there's a lot of emotion, even standing here, realizing how close some of those things that I'll be talking about geographically really are. 2 quick fun facts, and then I'm going to get into the story. I have a daughter who has a rare cameo solo on Stephen Curtis Chapman's Platinum album, Speechless. I'll tell you, if anybody wants to know the rest of the story, stay after, okay? And number 2, I got an unexpected cell phone call about 3 or 4 weeks ago from the International Space Station, okay? So ask me about those later, but those are pretty interesting, intriguing hooks. I'm not a speaker. I've never been a speaker. I'm a sharer, okay? So the fact that I'm up here is not overwhelming to me, but it's not something I do every week. Let's see. If I go long, feel free to leave or put a hook around my neck or whatever, because I might. So I'm going to quit talking about this. This is my story. I'm not saying it should be yours. It's my journey, and everybody's journeys are different, so I'm not trying to overlay the way that God's worked in my life and say that that's the way he should work in yours, because we're all unique and he loves us uniquely. I want to tell you my story of God's jealous, persistent, relentless pursuit of me. And I want to tell of his compassionate love for me and then point you to him and his revelation of himself through his word, and encourage you to wrestle hard with him. I'm just an ordinary Joe, and in one sense, an ordinary Job. And if we all told our stories honestly, and that happens around here a lot, most of us can say that we're ordinary Jobs as well. We have that parts of our journey and hard parts of our stories. So I don't think I'm unique in that. We all experience loss. We grieve from childhood. We lose toys and pets and friends, and our parents get divorced, and innocence and sibling. And as we get older, we lose jobs and careers and churches sometimes, and mentors, wealth, reputations, our own marriages, and then death of even loved ones. And sometimes we lose hope. For a long season, I experienced something that I would call, or secular world might call, grief-induced depression. It wasn't clinical depression. I wasn't stuck in the house, laid up all day, but it was. But I would call it, looking back on it particularly, might be called wrestling with God while selfishly refusing to yield to him. And I did that for a long time. And I'm not talking about it at a salvation level, but I'm talking about a relational level. And I really had my own way of wanting to be God and keeping all my idols. And most of those idols are socially acceptable good things that I thought, but they'd become idols in my life in a lot of different ways. And a lot of it was wrapped up in things that were definitely pride related. My prayer for you, for me, that we would wrestle hard with a good God and lose quickly. That's a really important thing if you're still wrestling with him. And I wrestle with him on an ongoing basis, and I have a lot of little mini matches, and I pray that I lose quickly. Because he wants so much more from us, and he's a jealous, persistent God, and his pursuit of us, he wants more than just a transactional relationship with him. So this is a story of hope, love, and joy. And let me pray for 13 seconds. Father, you know my heart. You know I want these guys to see me, to like me, to think of me as vulnerable and clever and smart. Expose my sinful arrogance and self-righteousness in my sinful heart, and cover it with your love, grace, and mercy so that they see only you. I worship and praise you this morning. Amen. So here we go. I'm going to buzz through a lot of things because the long version, like I said, is 8 or 9 hours. So I grew up in Grassland, just a few miles up the road. Went to Grassland Elementary School. I grew up in a Christian family. My mom and dad were Christians. Both sets of grandparents were Christians. My grandmom taught me Bible verses, Bible Memory Association. For some of you guys that may be that old and know and understand what that is, Bible stories. I became a Christian, and I can go back and remember it vividly as a 5-year-old, understanding my need for a Savior and my sin, and asking Jesus to come into my life on my couch before my mom would let me go out and play for the day in the summer of 1966-ish. So I've had a long relationship with Jesus, but it's had a lot of different phases to it. I was obedient and compliant. In middle school, I went off to Brentwood Academy, which I didn't even know existed a few days before I started there. It was a really, really young school at the time. I still had a pretty transactional relationship. I wanted to do all the right things so that God would give me all the right things, right? I wanted the fire insurance. I didn't want to go to hell. I knew that for sure. And I wanted other things. And the path seemed to be to have this relationship with Jesus, who I knew I had to have. But as I was kind of progressing through Brentwood Academy, there was a lady named Melissa Trevathan that later started Daystar Ministries. And she was a mentor to me. She was over the Christian Life Department at Brentwood Academy. I had some other folks that mentored me, discipled me, and loved on me. Mickey Jacobs was an important part of my life back then. I became still self-righteous and quietly arrogant, but I wasn't totally obnoxious at that phase of my life. I don't know if y'all have been through those phases, but I tried. I was pretty likable in the way I demonstrated my self-righteousness, okay? My dad, this is important because it goes into some of the baggage that I carry. My dad never went to college. He grew up very poor in Nashville. By the time he was 35, he was president of a bank that's about 2 blocks that way. It used to be Harpeth National Bank. Now it's First Horizon, I think. It's been bought and sold a number of times. So at 35, that was unheard of to be president of a bank. So he's a hardworking, bootstraps kind of guy, successful. It's a pretty big deal. So anyway, I graduated from Brentwood Academy. I'm fast forwarding big time to get to some other stuff. Went to Tennessee Tech, and while I was there, I went there on a civil engineering scholarship, walked on for football. God blessed me timing-wise. I ended up starting for 3 years. At 5'3", that's kind of an anomaly in Division I AA football. I was a place kicker. I wasn't a linebacker. I know y'all thought I was a linebacker. That ties into the space station call. Ask me about that later. Anyway, I was in student government, Baptist Student Union. I helped start the FCA chapter at Tech. God was just, my relationship with God, I was reading my Bible and I was writing and journaling, and God was just blessing and all this stuff it was just, the plan was working pretty darn good, and so anyway, get through Tech and graduate. I become a civil engineer for a couple of years. Mr. Brown at Brentwood Academy, the founding head, who was my principal, called me and said, "Hey, you want to come be the business administrator?" And I was 24, never seen a set of books before, but I said, "Sure, why not?" So I did that for a couple of years. Then I met my wife through relationships at the school. That's a whole 5-hour story in itself. But about that time, I met this guy named Mark Arnold, who then introduced me to a thing called Christian Leadership Concepts, and that Hal started. And that, looking back, had such a huge impact on my life through those relationships. And Meredith Flott, who some of you guys know, was my group leader. This would have been in like 86, I guess. No, 84-ish. And there was a book that we read called The Pursuit of God. And there's a chapter in it, chapter number 2, called The Blessedness of Possessing Nothing, that plays out in my story. I've reread that chapter 50 times, I bet, where it's Abraham and Isaac's story and God interacting, and Tozer talks about how we can make idols out of the best things and how God still wants to pursue us and worship him first, not even the good idols that we create. That plays out through my story in a big, big way. So anyway, while I was at Brentwood Academy, I met my wife. We got married. After 33 days, I asked her to marry me. 6 months later, we were married, and that was in December of 86. And then circumstantially, things started to change. We got married. We moved into the landings off of Moore's Lane. Some of y'all knows where that is. Within the first few months, we were burglarized. Somebody had a key, came in and took everything that we had. We didn't have much. I mean, we were newlyweds, but they took everything. All Lori's jewelry, my guitar, VCR was a big deal back then. They took everything, you know. Anyway, wiped us out. Then a couple of years later, we had moved down to Brentwood Point, which is about 3 blocks from there, over by the mall. The mall didn't exist yet. And we were hit by a tornado. My wife was 9 months pregnant at the time with our oldest daughter, Erin, and we should have died. I mean, literally, the unit next to us in the same building ended up the top floor on the other side of 65. And the unit on the other side had a tractor-trailer in its living room, and we were kind of insulated. But it did enough damage that it looked like a bomb went off in the house, and it took them 6 months to rebuild the condo. So, you know, you got burglary, tornado, you know, it's not like college anymore. You know, some things are going on. A little bit different. All the while, we started going to Christ Community Church, which at the time was like a block and a half that way. The sanctuary used to be literally 100 yards that way. And Scotty Smith was talking about grace and God's goodness in his relationship with him in a way that I had not heard before, or at least I had not embraced before. And that was really important because I was so hungry for that. And again, it's not that I didn't have an ongoing relationship with Jesus, but it was growing in phases and steps that were incredibly important. Erin was born. She became a new idol for me. I had my goody two-shoes self-righteousness. Now I had the new idol, Erin, too. Is added her to the list. She looked like me, girl form. She thought like me. She other than the fact that she was really wise, even as a young child. We had a gibberish language. We could talk. Y'all may have a particular child that you're closer to than others, but we could talk in just nonsense and have long conversations and know exactly what each other were thinking. So y'all, that's the kind of relationship we had. But still, all this other stuff is going on in the background, and without even understanding it, God was still saying, I want more of you, Ray. And at that time, I was working in another business that I felt really stuck in, getting an overwhelmed feeling. It was actually a family business, and I love my in-laws, but it was tough. And the only way you can get out of a family business, well, there's 2 ways to get out of a family business, right? Y'all know what they are? You can, actually, go into the ministry or death. But good call. Go into the ministry or death. So I chose, thinking about the ministry, called my good friend Melissa Trevathan, who discipled and walked with me a lot. She said, you need to go get a master's in Christian counseling. So I go, that sounds interesting. So I moved to Colorado for 2 years with my wife and my new baby. And it was an interesting deal. She was good friends with Dan Allender. Some of y'all may have heard of him before. And Larry Crabb. They were the guys that kind of ran the program that I went through. It's called the Institute of Biblical Counseling back there. It's a subset of Colorado Christian. But anyway, we moved out there sight unseen. Had no clue as to what we were doing. Met Larry and Dan, obviously, but was in a small little group setting that had 10 people sitting around a table. First week of this program. And I don't know, y'all ought to read about Dan Allender. Dan Allender is a brilliant, brilliant counselor and a wonderful person, and I love him to death. But this is the first time I'd met him, and he was kind of daunting in ways. And we were sitting around, and Dan actually was leading this small group. And so he's sitting in his chair with his big handlebar mustache at the time and his cup of coffee, and we're going around telling our story. But, you know, and they get to me, and I'm really being vulnerable, and I get a tear in my eye, and I feel like I'm just sharing deeply from my soul. And Dan cuts me short. He said, just mid-sentence, he said, Ray, you are an evil man. Have you ever loved anybody in your entire life? Think about that for a minute. This is the guy that I respect. I've read his books. And he cuts to the heart of the chase of my self-righteousness, of my desire to manipulate people and please people. And he did it with like this surgeon precision. It took me years to process that, because just rethinking my whole life in the context of the way that I was trying to control God, the way that I was trying to control my world, and that there's evilness in that. He didn't say I wasn't a Christian. He didn't say that I didn't love Jesus, but that was a huge, huge thing that really exposed the core of my selfishness and my self-righteousness. That was a big deal. So anyway, there's a ton of other things that happened that were critical through that phase that God used, but we moved back to Nashville, and I did complete my degree, but he didn't kick me out of the program. We moved back to Nashville. We just had Alex a month before we moved back, and this would have been back in 91-ish. So we moved back with Aaron, who was about 4.5 at the time, and Alex, it was 1 month old. So we moved back, of course, to Grassland, where I lived in a house by Walnut Grove for 26 years. I'd lived on that street as a little bitty kid, even before, so very familiar area. I come back and people think that because I've been off to college and gotten a master's in counseling, I knew something that might be helpful. I become an elder at Christ Community Church. I'm doing all kinds of interesting things, being asked to be on a couple of little boards and things like that. All the while, you know, we got the burglary, the tornado, the Dan calling me an evil man, and all of a sudden, new college debt, and 2 little mini failed businesses, and everything's just snowballing. And just, I know none of y'all have been in that situation before, but it becomes overwhelming. And we were practically bankrupt. I mean, literally, on paper, we could have easily filed for bankruptcy. And you know, compared to what's going on in Israel and what's going on in Sudan and what's going on with Helene, it's not that big a deal. But in the moment, in my own selfishness, it was a huge deal. And Satan puts all kinds of crazy ideas in your head. Failure from being compared to my dad, who by the time he was 35 was the president of a bank, and here I am almost 35-ish, and I'm bankrupt, basically. So y'all can kind of understand how all that picture starts fitting together. So there was one day, I had some flexibility at lunch. I drove over to Edwin Warner Park. Y'all know where that is? Over by Steeplechase area. Parked my car by a little creek. And, you know, I was depressed. I was angry. I was, the way that I didn't even know to put the word anger to it yet, but I was. I mean, I was raging at God in a very quiet, sophisticated sort of way. So somebody laughed. They know what that means. But I remember in the midst of that, in a very selfish sort of way, I just wanted relief at the time. I said, God, I'm not going to kill myself. But if you'd grant me a heart attack right now and take me, I'd really, really appreciate it. You know, I didn't have a plan. I wasn't ready. I went back to work after that. But there was that level of heaviness. And I bet you if everybody in here that was honest, I don't know, maybe half of you have been at a place similar to that at some point in your life. Maybe not that distinct, but I don't feel unique in that, but it was real to me at that moment. So at the time, we were in a small group with Mike and Renda Smith. Mike's impacted many, many people. And Mike and Renda said, well, just sell your house and come move in with us. I mean, we had people that loved us so well, making those kind of offers. But still, the guilt, the shame was there. I needed money still. I had to go ask my dad for a loan, which was one of the more humbling things I've ever had to do in my life, because he was an independent bootstraps kind of guy and made it, and here I am with a college degree and da-da-da-da, and I'm having to just beg basically for a loan from my dad, which he graciously gave us, but it still didn't relieve the shame and the guilt that came with it. Then I'm in the wrong job yet again. Things aren't really getting a lot better, other than the creditors aren't calling right now. And I remember Aaron was probably 8 at the time. I used to do Bible stories with him, or tell him a story at night, Aaron and Alex, as they're getting ready for bed. And one night, I just went in and laid down, and I said, Aaron, I don't want to go to work tomorrow. Why I'm that vulnerable with my daughter, I don't know. But she was wise counsel. I mean, not that was unique and different than what I would have said to my wife, but I remember that as we're sitting there on the bed, laying there looking at the ceiling, she goes, well, why do you have to go to work? And I thought about it for a minute, and I said, well, if I don't go to work, I might get in trouble. And then she proceeded to ask me a series of 10 questions. Well, what would happen then? And what would happen then? Like, okay, I might get fired. I might lose my job. We might lose our house. We might live under a bridge. We might get sick. We might die. And Erin looked at me and she said, and what would happen then? I said, well, I'd go to heaven, or we would. And she said, so why do you have to go to work? And this is an 8-year-old little kid. And the joy of seeing her anyway, special child, contextualized a lot of things for me throughout a lot of my life, in her short life. So at that time, I listened to contemporary Christian music a lot. I don't know if y'all did back in the days, but this has been way back. And a guy named Stephen Curtis Chapman had a song that I listened to all the time called Not Home Yet. And it's talking about us being weary travelers, traveling down a road, but we're not home yet. And then there was another song that I listened to regularly over and over again by a guy named Michael Card, who some of you guys may know. And it was called Joy in the Journey. And there's a line in that song that talks about hope for the hopeless. And that was a big thing. And to be able to think about those things in the midst of still feeling like I'm still wrestling with God. I still haven't given up in a lot of ways. So fast forward to our small group meeting on January 2nd. And this would have been in 98, I guess. And we were at the Coley's house. Some of you guys know Dan and Terry Coley, and they lived off of Barry's Chapel, about a mile on the other side of Hillsborough Road from where we lived. And we were at their house, and it was like one of those Norman Rockwell kind of nights where all the family was there. We were watching the UT Orange Bowl game. There was chili, and there were kids running around dancing on tables. You know, it was really cool. It was one of those really fun nights. We had Mike and Brenda Smith, Dan and Terry Coley, Stephen and Mary Beth Chapman, Mike and Katie Wilson, who a lot of y'all probably know. It was a really cool little small group that loved us so well, even in my conditions that I was in sometimes. It looked like a lot of introverted, passive gloom sometimes. It wasn't rage out externally. But anyway, so Lori leaves that meeting, that small group deal, to go home early at halftime of the game, and I'm going to catch a ride with Mike and Brenda Smith. A mile and a half, not even a mile and a half, on the other side of Hillsborough Road. So they take off, go home, because we're going hiking the next day, and she's putting the girls to bed. Well, Mike and Renda and I leave after the game, and we approach Hillsborough Road from Barry's Chapel, and there's one of those big, huge tower lights down there, and they're rerouting traffic all the way around. You can't get through the intersection. And I made a comment to Mike and Renda. I said, I hate it when I see that, because I've grown up here, and there's such a probability I might know somebody that's in that accident. Well, we pull into my driveway, and our car's not there after having been rerouted. So Mike says, calm down, it's gonna be okay. So we drive down to the intersection, and we see my 1984 Honda Accord, which back then was a tiny car. And it looked like it had been in a trash compactor. And so we get down there, and they say, of course, at the scene of the accident, there are no fatalities, but I saw the car, and I thought all three of them were dead, because Lori's door was bent out where it ended up. She'd been, from a physics standpoint, she stayed still, and the car got knocked out from underneath her. Went out the side window, had a fractured neck. Erin's door, Erin sat right behind her, was a direct impact. A kid went airborne off of our car in a pickup truck, full speed. And it was just totally demolished, and her head slammed into Alex on the back seat and had a head collision with Alex. So I was pretty certain that they were all dead at that time. But we hop in the car, fly down to Vanderbilt Hospital. The waiting room is already totally packed with everybody that knew us, because I didn't have a cell phone back then and nobody knew where I was. And but the phone tree had worked externally, and there were, 50 or 100 people already at the waiting room in Vanderbilt, the emergency room. Before that was a children's hospital. And so I get there, and like the social worker calls me and says, Mr. Mullican, said, can we come talk to you? And a few of those people that I was talking about go back into the room with me. And, you don't want to be called into a little room in the back with the social worker. It's just not something you want to ever do. And the lady was very kind and had people around me, and she said, Mr. Mullican, I'm sorry to tell you, but your daughter, Erin, was killed immediately in the car accident, and your wife is in this room over here, and she's got an aspen collar on. She's fractured her neck, and we're not sure of the extent of her injuries. and your other daughter, Alex, is over in another room, and she's intubated, and we're not sure of the extent of her injuries. That's a lot to get your head around in a couple of minutes. You kind of, what do you do? And then somewhere in the middle of all that, somebody calls me and said, Mr. Mullican, we need to get you to go back and identify the body of your daughter. So I think it was Dan and Carter Crenshaw and Mike, and there's 3 or 4 people that went with me. And we went back into this back room. And there was Erin's body. And they hadn't closed her eyes. Her eyes were still open. And that sounds harsh, but it was an incredible gift. And I get chill bumps when I talk about it still, because her beautiful blue sparkling eyes were dull gray. And almost in an audible voice, God said, she's not there. It's not like she's just asleep or that she's temporarily incapacitated. She's not there. And that was the weirdest gift in a most bizarre sort of way. So anyway, all this is happening, bang, 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 bang. So the next thing I've got to do is figure out how to talk to Lori, who's banged up, her teeth are knocked out, her head's messed up. She's got to ask me to call her on, and she's wanting to know what in the heck's going on because she is conscious. And after a couple of wisdom sessions back to my friends and back to her room and back and forth, I have to communicate to Lori that Erin's dead, that Erin passed in the accident. Again, one of the top 3 hardest, maybe one hardest things I've ever done in my life. You don't want to do it. And yet God's still in control of all this and orchestrating a weird story that I don't have a clue about. There were people that loved us. The ministry of presence was shown to us in such incredible ways. People that just gave me a key to a hotel room and said, you don't need to go home tonight. There's a hotel 2 blocks away. You can stay here. Dan and Van. And there are other people that did all kinds of things. It wasn't the people that gave us books or tried to explain God. It was the people that just took care of the simple things and that just stood with us and that were just there. And we learned so much. And we were loved so much. And it's such a weird deal because it's kind of, when you get into situations like that, it's the collision or coexistence of seeing heaven and hell simultaneously. You've got all these horrible things going on, and you've got all the people in the world that love you all wanting to be around you at the same time. It's just a weird confluence of circumstances. Sorry, I've got to hurry. During that first 24 hours, and again, this isn't an audible voice of God, but to me it was pretty darn close. I couldn't tell you what pitch it was at. But God really said to me, okay, you saw the car, and you know that they all 3 should be dead. God said something to the effect of, I was there in the intersection. And I saved Lori and Alex. And I'm not such a small God that I couldn't have saved Erin too. And I'm not going to explain it to you. You're not going to understand it. But you're going to have to trust me with this. Still hadn't explained it to me. But he went on to say, are you going to let me be God in your life? Or are you really? I'm out. I'm back. He said, I think Satan did that on purpose. But anyway, are you gonna go off the deep end and go into a deeper depression and just kill yourself and check out? Or are you gonna give up and just totally trust me and worship me above everything else? And that's not what you expect to hear from God when your daughter just died necessarily. But it was very clear and it created such peace, because at that point I said, okay, I'm done. I repent. I'm going to obey you. I'm going to look for you in different ways and let you pursue me. And it was remarkable, because this low-grade depression that I dealt with probably for 10 or 12 years, just wrestling with God over things not working out and him not being the genie in the bottle that he was supposed to be, because I was doing all the right things and all the other stuff. The depression was gone almost immediately. The sadness wasn't gone. The sadness wasn't gone. I still miss Aaron today, but the depression was gone. And I'm so thankful for that. It seems so subtle, because there really wasn't a circumstantial change from one minute to the next, but there was a very different spiritual, relational surrender of my will at a totally different level. And that's not to say that I get that every moment, every day now. So I'm not saying I'm like fixed or all better. But anyway, it was incredible. It was one of those moments that you just go back to and go, I took a deep breath for the first time in a long time. And there was peace in my heart, my soul, in a way that hadn't been there for a long time. So Lori got out of the hospital just in time for the visitation. She had her aspen collar on and was still banged up. It was down at Williamson Memorial. The funeral, Alex got out of the hospital just in time for the funeral, which was about 100 yards that way. It was an incredible, incredible time. It was packed to overflowing. They had people in other side rooms watching it. Stephen sang Not Home Yet. Mike Card came and sang Join the Journey. It was, Mike Smith told the story about Aaron asking me why I had to go to work. This is to a group of people that aren't all Christians, because when a child dies unexpectedly, it opens the door and cracks the door open to people's hearts in ways that not many other things do. And I wanted all these things to be done, and I wanted Carter to preach the gospel. And he did. I mean, there's a whole row of third graders with white roses that go up and put their rose on the casket during the sermon. There's all kinds of people coming from all parts of Franklin, the communities, because both of our parents were involved, that heard the gospel in a very, very special, unique, tender way. Lives were changed. People still come up to us and talk to us about the funeral and about being there. Some of y'all in this room were there. I know, and I appreciate you being in a relationship with us for a long time. I have 2 minutes to do 1.5 pages, so let's see if I can. The ministry of presence that we felt as people loved us and that God loved us through people is something that we, as a family, as a couple, just want to be about. After the accident, Alex had PTSD. She's a 5-year-old, and her sister, her hero, has been ripped out of her life. And goes from being a compliant, wonderful kindergartner to biting her teacher if her mom's trying to take it away, throwing her shoes down the hall at people and escaping from school and running down the street. So, you can imagine she's got PTSD, she's got separation anxiety. So we're dealing with all this, and I start telling her this story that I make up every night at bedtime, just trying to get her to go to sleep. And I told it to her over and over again, probably in 30 different versions or more than that I had made up. And it actually has become a book. And there's a free copy for all of y'all going out the door if you want it, but it's called The King's Smile. A friend of mine did the artwork. The story has a lot of parts of my own journey in it too, but the essence of it's a story that I made up for Alex. We had David, our son, a couple of years later because we didn't want Alex to be an only child. David's not a replacement for Aaron. Aaron's still a part of our family. Job he got 2 of everything except his children because his other children still existed. I don't know if y'all noticed that in the book of Job, but we adopted Keely and Ellie from China. The kid that ran the red light was 17 years old. About a year after that, we got put into a relationship with each other. He's become a dear, dear friend. Still keep up with him a lot. About a year and a half ago, I used to meet with him once every week for a long time, but then it's once a quarter. We still catch up. He's moved out in the country. But about 2 years ago, at 40, he got married. And he asked Lori and I to come to the wedding. It was a very small family wedding out in Leapers Fork at a really small venue. And at the dinner afterwards, he asked Lori and I to sit at the table right by him and by his new bride. And on top of that, for dinner, he asked me to pray over them. Only God. And then this summer, Alex got married. My little 5-year-old girl that had dealt with all kinds of emotional stuff, physical stuff, everything. She got married to a wonderful guy named Virgil who loves her dearly. It's just God's redemption of stories and God's intervention in hard ways sometimes that we don't have a clue about. On her marker, sorry, I'm going to go about a minute and a half longer. On Aaron's marker, we've got the verse from Job 42:5 that says, depending on which version you read, my ears had heard of you, but now my eyes have seen you. So as we put that on our marker, it's not because we want to go back to the gravesite and say, okay, Aaron sees God now. She'd heard about God, now she sees. It's for us when we go back to the gravesite to remember that during that time, we saw God in ways that we had only heard about. And we want to remember that. It's been almost 26 years ago, but that's still a part of our journey. God continues to reveal himself to us. Job, if you remember, ended up, God said, where were you when I? And he ends up saying, my ears have heard of you now, my eyes have seen you. And he puts sackcloth and ashes on. And it doesn't go on to exactly say it, but that's worship. That's pure worship, saying that I get that I'm the created. I know you love me, but you're God and I'm not. Mike Smith said it at the funeral. Mike Smith's 3 rules that he got from somebody else. God's God. I'm not God. Don't confuse rule 1 with rule 2. It's pretty good baseline stuff. But God showed himself. God would not have offered. If you look at the story of Abraham and Isaac, the blessedness of possessing nothing, Job, and the book of Jonah, in God's interactions with Abraham, Job, and Jonah, and you said, okay, let's use that as a counseling model and assess God. So God says to Abraham, go sacrifice your son. He says to Job, okay, Satan, go. I know Job's a good guy and he loves me, but go let his children can die, his wealth, everything else, and he can be in sackcloth. He's got leprosy. And when all that's happening, with all that still intact, God's counseling to Job is, where were you and I? Where were you and I? It wasn't, oh, I'm so empathetic. Our God, like Dan Allender in some ways, but way different in a different level, precisely wants our hearts and our affection, and he's jealous. And he loves us enough to pursue us in hard, hard ways. He's not always the puppy dog God that's portrayed all around. He loves us too much to be a puppy dog God. He pursues our hearts. He pursues all your hearts. So my deal is, I hope that I will continue to be an Abraham who lays down Isaac pretty quickly, not a Job who wrestles with God for a long time, but definitely not a Jonah. I don't know if y'all remember the story of Jonah, but Jonah he gets called to go to Nineveh. He doesn't want to go. He gets swallowed by the whale. He gets barfed up. All the pop. And finally, God gets him. He becomes a world-class evangelist. He's not just a prophet anymore. 120,000 people get saved in Nineveh, like Billy Graham on steroids for the moment. I mean, it's like a world-class evangelist. And then he goes and gets depressed and sits up on a hill in the sunshine, and he's mad, right? And then God gives him a little plant, and he gets happy about the shade, and the guy gives a worm, and the plant dies. And God comes back to Jonah after just seeing over 100,000 people brought to himself, and says to Jonah he said, Jonah, do you do well to be angry? Which is a great question for us all to ask. I ask that of myself a lot because I still have a tendency to do that sometimes. Do you do well to be angry? And Jonah's answer, the last words from Jonah were, yes, angry enough to die. Those are the last words we hear from Jonah. Jonah may have died a depressed, angry prophet that had incredible impact and brought many people to the world. I don't want to be Jonah. I don't want y'all to be Jonah. I want y'all to live in the joy a relationship, the impact of God, like I get to. Using Tozer's pictures, I'm still an idol factory. I try to tear down the idols, then I try to tear down the factory, and I end up rebuilding it. And God, that's a cyclical thing for me. I don't have it figured out, but at least I'm a little bit more aware of it. So again, a couple of things. Wrestle hard and lose quickly. There's joy and peace without having to be in control. God's God and I'm not. The ministry of presence, just be there for people. You don't have to have the right words. You don't have the right anything. Just be there for people. Just show up, because everybody there is uncomfortable. And God doesn't need us to speak for him. He needs to be there for him. Lori and I love hospital visits. I love funerals. I love coffees with people. I love lunches with people. I'm not a speaker, but God's called me to look for places to enter into people's lives, and I think that's what he calls all of us to do. So I'm over time. Please pick up, I got boxes of books. It's written as a children's story, but it's really a fable with a lot of layering intended for adults, and that can get into adult hearts in ways that sometimes a big, long book can't. So please pick one up on the way out. Let's just pray. Dear Father, thank you so much. I hope that my rambling words have been translated by the Holy Spirit to the hearts of these men in ways that is helpful and shows you as a great, good God that loves us and pursues us and is jealous of our hearts and souls in ways that we can't imagine. Thank you for loving us. Thank you for Jesus especially. Be with all the folks around the world that don't know you, for the folks that are in hardship right now, and just show us ways to love people well that you put in our path. In Christ's name we pray. Amen.